So here we are at the beginning of a new week, and happy to start the week with overall an exploration of delusion. And but for now, for this morning sitting, one of the hallmarks of Vipassana practice is simplicity. And if there was a Munindraji, an Indian teacher that some of us knew, had the practice with, he would say that if it's not simple, it's not Vipassana practice. And the relationship between the two can be in the meaning of Vipassana as clear seeing. If there is not simplicity in the perceptions, then there's, we don't perceive clearly. If we don't see clearly, there is no wisdom. And in fact, some of the wisdom that we practice with is wisdom about simplicity. The tremendous value of not getting involved in planning or analyzing or trying to figure out or trying to fix, engineer our practice. Even if something doesn't seem to be going right in practice, rather than spending a lot of time trying to make it right, the paradigm shift of Vipassana practice is to say, well, what would be the simplest way of knowing this? Just knowing it. And to have the wisdom to, in some way, step away and find some freedom, some kind of independence in the clear seeing. And the beauty of it, and really the word beauty is really meant as part of the tradition. We'll talk about it later. The beauty is in the clarity of the seeing, in the simplicity of the perception, the clearness of the knowing. And it's possible to know clearly, for example, that I'm confused. There's confusion here. This is an experience that's complicated. I don't know what's happening. My mind seems to want to fix it, run away, or attack it, or analyze it. And each of those little recognitions can be in itself have this beauty of clarity, the beauty of simplicity, just knowing this, just knowing this. So, we begin with the posture, meditation posture. And ideally, it's a simple posture. Over time, practicing the same meditation posture over and over again, the body makes small adjustments and finds its way to a posture that is relatively easy to maintain and becomes simple. So taking a little bit of time, maybe swaying forward and back, left to right, and kind of until you find a kind of center place where there's a balance. And then if you're sitting upright, from the sitting bones up the spine, making small adjustments to have the weight of your body, your torso, centered on the vertebrae. And as they travel up the spine, you come to where the neck, last vertebrae, connects with the skull. Maybe you can create a little space there by lifting the head up or pulling the back of the head slightly up and the chin slightly down. And then gently closing your eyes. And to establish a renewed connection, familiarity, grounding in the breathing, taking a few long, slow, deep breaths, 3/4 full, and gently breathing out longer than you normally would. Not by forcing the breath out, but by releasing, letting go. And letting your breathing return to normal. And scan through your body. And as you exhale, if there's places in your body that you can relax, muscles held in ways that you can release, relax the muscles. Also, you can see if you can, as you exhale, relax the mind, the thinking mind. And part of relaxing the mind is allowing the mind for these minutes of the meditation to be simple, simply with the present moment. And perhaps you can begin practicing simple, clear awareness with your breathing. Not being ambitious with your breathing or trying to make anything happen, except being with your breathing. With clarity and knowing, with simplicity of attention. As if the fog has cleared and you can see clearly, as if the light has been turned on and you can see clearly. Not what you think you should be seeing, but whatever is easy to experience in the breathing, being content with what is easy, just as a place to be in the present, appreciating simple awareness. And if anything occurs that makes it difficult or it takes you away from breathing, experiment with how simple you can know it. so simple that you're not entangled with it, for or against it. Maybe more like a feeling of awe or wonder from the lack of complications, lack of being for and against, just simple knowing. And after knowing it for a little bit, begin again with your breathing. Being simple in the attention to breathing in and breathing out. What is the simplest way you can know what's happening now? And then to keep it that simple. Take refuge in that simplicity. Simple knowing of what's happening can provide wisdom. One wisdom is that getting more complicated about what's happening loses some of that simplicity, loses some of the clarity, loses some of the absence of entanglement. The simpler the awareness, the more clearly we can see how we lose that simplicity, that clarity. And as we come to the end of this sitting, the simplicity of being present can also reveal the complexity that takes us away from our goodwill, our simplest basic human kindness. Simplicity of knowing, clarity of knowing enables basic human kindness to have a chance to be present, gives it a room and time and space, so it too can be available for how we meet the world. And so as we come to the end of this sitting, perhaps in whatever simplicity and clarity you have, to open your heart to the world and gaze upon the world with kindness, with goodwill, a generosity of spirit, wishing may all beings be happy. May all beings be safe. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings be free. And may there be something from this morning's meditation that supports each of us to contribute to that as a possibility. May we all live for the welfare and happiness of all beings. So this week's theme, following up on the last 2 weeks, is the third of the 3 unwholesome roots, sometimes given the dramatic name of the 3 poisons, um, sometimes described as the 3 ways that when firewood burns, it burns itself. So that these 3 fires, sometimes they're called the 3 fires, they arise out of us, they burn from us, while they also burn us. So these are greed, hatred, and delusion, or greed, ill will, and confusion. But we'll stay for now with the translation delusion. And excuse me for a minute. So we'll stay for now with the translation of delusion for moha, M-O-H-A. But as the pattern has been for these last 2 weeks, this first talk will not be about this unwholesome root of delusion, but rather the opposite. And the tradition calls the opposite non-delusion, amoha, and it takes many forms. It's not just simply the absence of something, but think of it as the absence that allows the opposite to appear. And many things are kind of the opposite. So, for example, wisdom, discernment, vision, clarity, understanding. The tradition also has penetration as the opposite. So we'll talk a little bit more about this. But for now, I want to emphasize clarity. That rather than wisdom being necessarily a sophisticated understanding of things, certainly understanding is part of it, but so much of it arises out of clarity, clear seeing, clear knowing, clear perception. And so this is something to really appreciate a lot and celebrate. It's such a sense of refreshment and openness or peacefulness or simplicity or brightness that that comes with non-delusion. Maybe the most dramatic or the most powerful image or idea for this idea of non-delusion is the idea of being awake. And the word Buddhism could be translated more literally into English as awakeism. It's the ism, it's the religion of being awake, of being non-deluded. And often there's the strongest association with awakening is the ending of ignorance. So it's a variation of delusion. So the tradition talks about, I think, this wonderful kind of analogies for non-delusion. One of them is turning on the light. That we're in the dark, and then the light goes on, and then we see clearly what's around us. And the other is this non-delusion is not a passive thing, but it becomes like a skilled guide that leads us through the forest, through the jungle. Someone who knows the forest, the jungle really well, and they can just guide us through. So a non-delusion has a function of helping us to see the path of practice. It shows us, where to practice, where the practice is, where the path is found. And the other analogy that's given is that of an arrow, a skilled archer who can shoot an arrow and it penetrates whatever it is that is shot. So that the idea of a skilled archer is one who has really good eyesight, really precise kind of ability to really calmly stay present and see what's there, and then really see through it. See kind of not just the projections, not the bias, not the preferences we have, but to see through all that, penetrate all that, so we see things clearly for what they are themselves. And I love this analogy of an archer because of a story that maybe I've told this before. There was here in California a wonderful Zen teacher who came from Japan in the late 1960s named Kobun Chino. And apparently in Japan he'd studied the Japanese art of archery. And so one day he was going to demonstrate his the ritual or the practice of archery at a retreat center on the coast here called Esalen. And Esalen was kind of has a big kind of grass lawn or something on the edge of a cliff that overlooks the Pacific. And so there were people gathered on the lawn to watch Kobun Chino do his thing, and he took a long time to get all ready. And a lot of the ritual and all was the preparation of getting himself centered and balanced, and the feet just grounded, and the spine straight, and the head in the right position, and putting the arrow and the bow just the right way. And it took apparently a very long time to all the preparations, getting ready, but he had such focus and such stillness and such quiet and such poise that I think everyone felt concentrated. Everyone got pulled in. Everyone got very quiet. Like this was a demonstration of, skillful elegance, skillful concentration, presence, stillness. And then when he had the target clearly in his sight, he let the arrow go. And it flew through the air, and it hit and penetrated its target perfectly. Bullseye. He had aimed for the Pacific Ocean, and the arrow landed perfectly in it. But this idea of being poised and still in the archer who sees clearly. So there are these different words that are associated with non-delusion, and one of them is to have discernment, to really kind of make distinction between what is wholesome and unwholesome, skillful and unskillful, what is helpful and not helpful. Or to say it, to keep it so it's really simple between what is harmful and what's beneficial. And of course, not always so easy to discern this, but the greater the wisdom, the more clearly that's discernible. And in much of Buddhist practice, as we get wiser and wiser, or less and less delusion, it's more and more obvious, right in the moment, where the benefit is and where the non-benefit is. So this ability to see that. And that also gives birth to the ability to have a vision for where the path is, the path of practice. And it's to follow what's wholesome, what's beneficial, to follow where the non-attachment is and the freedom is. And to have a vision for that as part of this clarity, this non-delusion. And it gives life a kind of a purpose, a kind of direction, a kind of that can be quite powerful, quite meaningful, partly because it's so freeing and so valuable. So this factor of wisdom, discernment, vision, understanding, is said to be a beautiful state of mind. So when it's there, it's not obscured or fogged over by confusion and guessing and analyzing and trying to figure out. In and of itself, the state of this clear awareness of wisdom is a beautiful state of mind. So whether there's brightness or clarity or illumination, simplicity, all these things associated with it, as we practice Buddhism, it's sooner or later, and sometimes maybe it's later, or sometimes it's sooner and later, and in between, we begin to slowly wake up, slowly discern, see, recognize the mind's capacity for simplicity, for clarity, for wisdom, for understanding, for discernment. Not in a complicated way, but it's obvious, it's right there. And one of the ways to see that, and why I'm starting the week with this topic, is that at some point we see the distinction between a simple clarity, a simple presence, simple being aware of the present moment, and a way of being that's more complicated, maybe much more complicated. Maybe we lose the present moment for entanglement in the past and the future. Maybe we lose the simplicity because we've gotten very caught in our preferences with what should be in the present moment. Or we're caught up in our fears and our analysis, insecurities around it. Or we're caught up in our ill will, our projections, our bias in relationship to whatever we're present for. But if we have a reference point of clarity, of wakefulness, of wisdom, in all its many forms, in one of its many forms, any of its forms, there's a reference point to see how we lose that. And we see that getting pulled into delusion, pulled into projections and biases and kind of an overlay of opinions and on top of whatever we're seeing, including seeing ourselves and seeing other people, that there's a loss there. There's a diminishment there. The light gets turned off. We don't have this. We lose our calm and we become agitated. We lose our guide. We lose our ability to see where the path is. And so then it becomes obvious much more obvious, easier to see what delusion is. Easier to see the disadvantage because we see, we recognize what we've lost. We've lost that clarity. To start with to try to see and understand delusion, just without any practice at all, then it becomes an analytical exercise. It becomes like getting a clear definition of it and applying that and looking at our mind and trying to understand, well, this is delusion, that's what they're talking about, and I'm not supposed to have it. And it's almost like, getting complicated to free ourselves from the complication of delusion. But if we're settled, calm, peaceful, non-agitated, there's a basic clarity of mind, then we have a very different reference point for recognizing delusion, including the reference point, the understanding that we don't have to feel ashamed or feel angry or feel upset by the movement into delusion. All we have to do is to recognize it as delusion. And the simple recognition, the clear recognition, oh, this is delusion, brings us back to some of that clarity. And so it's not a moralistic critique of delusion. It's a clear recognition, clear knowing of the disadvantage of being pulled into it. And we know that the alternative, not being deluded, is so much better, so much more satisfying. So the wisdom, so it gives us the opportunity to have non-delusion about delusion, to have wisdom about delusion. And in some ways, this is central to the Buddhist enterprise. So it's not wisdom about wisdom so much, but freedom is found in wisdom about delusion. And that'll be the topic for tomorrow. So thank you all very much, and look forward to our time tomorrow.